with your work on this topic and dealing with children over the years. And I want to ask you, first of all, do you suggest that parents actually engage children on this issue, even if they have, the children that is, even if the children have not begun to ask questions on their own?
Not with very young children. In fact, I think children below the age of 7 probably shouldn't even be watching these events on television. But unfortunately, many, many young children did, because the parents had the television sets on because they were so anxious to follow the events, and the children saw a lot of the atrocities and the tragedy and the violence associated with what happened, and were very, very terrified and fearful. In those cases, the parents have to reassure those children and make them feel safe, and try to explain to them. The children will have questions about what's going on, what's happening, and they have to tell them the truth, that some angry people who are angry against the United States committed this awful act and blew up the buildings and killed people and injured people, but to also then reassure them that they are safe. Children will very quickly personalize these types of tragedies, and they'll wonder whether someone's going to blow up their school, someone's going to blow up a building in their town, whether their parents are safe going to work. So they're going to have a lot of fear and anxiety.
Well, let me ask you, since you go to that point, you hit two things I do want to talk to you about. Number one, schools. Number two, well, let's begin with this one first of all. How do you approach a child with that, and talk to him about the things like that? You just mentioned the vulnerabilities that their parents may have when they go to work, or what may happen to them when they go to school. Well, how do you talk to a child about that and avoid instilling some sense of victimhood?
Well, I think that one of the things is that the society is not completely safe, and parents already teach their children how to protect themselves. We did a lot of that after the school shootings and so on. So many of them know that things are not completely safe. So I think in this situation, you tell them, just like you did after the school shootings, that you're trying to make everything as safe as possible for them, that the government is, the FBI is, the aviation industry is, and that you are safe. And also, particularly for children outside of New York and Washington, that it's nothing like that is likely to happen to them.
Well, Doctor, I'm sorry to interrupt. I want to cut you off because it sounds like your microphone just fell off. I want to give you a chance to find it and pick it up, because I want people to hear this point that you're making. And folks, you have to understand, here we go, man. This is live television, and this is the kind of thing that does happen from time to time. So I want to let you begin at that remark again, Doctor, because I think that's very important. The idea of what it is that you're supposed to be talking to children about who don't live in New York, children who are outside of the areas of Washington or D.C. or New York where these things have happened.
Yeah, the children who live outside, I think you can tell them they're relatively safe. They haven't experienced it directly like the children have in Washington, D.C., and New York, who I think are suffering another level of trauma because of it, and another level of fear. So they're going to need even more attention, just like the adults there are suffering from a lot of losses and grief. Yeah. I think children who live in other parts of the country, you can pretty much reassure them that they're safe, and that the government is doing all that they can and will track down the perpetrators, and this is not likely to happen in their community, and then give them a lot of support, a lot of family spirit, togetherness, and it will help them. Well, I know there are children already who have been watching these events on television and have had nightmares and are very, very anxious about what might happen to them. But I think with support from the family and so on, that this will pass and they'll be okay.
Wise words.
But it will take some time. Also, schools can do things. Some children want to feel like they're able to help. You know, if they wrote some poems, if they had some art drawings and so on that they made for the families or to the victims and so on, it gives them a chance to show that they also care, and I think helps to relieve a lot of the grief and pain that they're feeling.
Dr. Alvin Toussaint, we thank you very much for bearing with us this morning. We appreciate your words of wisdom. We certainly hope that they have been digested out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, let's go now from Boston up to New York and Paula.
All right, Leon. as you know, there's a lot of new information coming in, and we're all kind of scrambling. I wanted to alert you to the fact that very shortly, Governor Pataki of New York, Mayor Giuliani of New York City, and the president will be holding a conference call. We have every reason to believe we're going to be able to show you that. We're going to be able to eavesdrop in on that conversation, legally, of course, I might add. But as we wait for that call to get underway, I just want to quickly bring you up to date on what is going on in this part of the country. We have some pictures now of Kennedy Airport, which will show for you that they are opening up to limited service. And you just heard Transportation Director Mineta describing how travelers, if they choose to travel over the next couple of weeks, well, forever, I guess we're told, they will see increased security. That's not apparent from these pictures, but clearly the airports, in order to open up to this kind of service, have to put into effect some new security guidelines. Mr. Mineta mentioned that there will be no longer will there be any curbside check-in. Only ticketed passengers will be allowed through security. No knives of any kind will be allowed to be taken on board. In addition to that, there is going to be a much higher standard used for employing security personnel. In addition to this, we're just beginning to get a sense of the scale of the tragedy witnessed here in New York City. The mayor of New York City confirming that some 4,763 people are on the missing list. Some 94 bodies have been recovered so far, not all of those identified. Right now, I'm going to check in with Kelly Wallace, who is standing by at the White House. Kelly, we haven't heard much about what the president has been doing today. Can you fill us in on that?
Absolutely. Just like yourself, Paula, we are waiting. We know the president expected to make a telephone call. We were told to Mayor Giuliani, you adding more information there, that Governor Pataki will be joining that call. The president really to say that the full weight of the government is out there to help New York City, Pennsylvania, certainly the Pentagon, deal with search and rescue operations. We know, Paula, the president was in the Oval Office shortly after 7 a.m., getting his daily national security and intelligence briefings. He also, Paula, has been working the phones, continuing to build what this White House has been calling an international coalition against terrorism. He called the Prime Minister of Japan, the Prime Minister of Italy, Lord Robertson of NATO, and Crown Prince Abdullah of Saudi Arabia. Ari Fleischer, the president's spokesman, saying all four, expressing their condolences and sympathies to the American people, and also saying that all four stand united against terrorism. Paula, you've heard us. We've been reporting that the White House trying to build this sort of international consensus. Reporters pressing Ari Fleischer to say, what is the U.S. government asking of these countries? Is the U.S. asking for military assistance, economic assistance, to place sanctions against any country when and if the U.S. retaliates? Fleischer would not respond, but he said it's more than rhetoric that the U.S. is asking for support from these countries. We also know, Paula, the president will be going to a local hospital in the Washington, D.C. area later this morning to visit with some of the families of the victims affected by, obviously, the plane crash at the Pentagon, and to thank the doctors and nurses who are helping the victims. And Paula, as you've been reporting, there was some interesting information that also came out from Ari Fleischer concerning Air Force One. We, of course, were told by the White House yesterday that the White House had real and credible, those are the words in the White House was using, information that the White House and Air Force One were targets of these hijackers. A report in today's New York Times, Karl Rove, one of the president's top political advisors, telling the New York Times that there was a telephone threat that came into Air Force One as the president was leaving Sarasota, Florida, and as that plane was in the air. Karl Rove telling the New York Times that that threat was deemed credible, and therefore that is why the president went off to a military base in Louisiana and then to Nebraska. Ari Fleischer telling us again that that information is correct. Ari Fleischer saying that this caller told whoever the person talking to that Air Force One is a target. Ari Fleischer was asked if the caller used the code name for Air Force One, and he said the caller did in fact use that code name, and that is why White House officials deemed this a credible threat and why that plane was rerouted to Louisiana. And one other, I know we're throwing a lot at you all, one other piece of information, Paula, President will be declaring today that tomorrow should be a national day of prayer and remembrance. The president will be going and attending a local church service here in Washington, and at that point in time he will be asked asking Americans on their lunch hours tomorrow to go to a church, a synagogue, a mosque, and to pray for the victims and their families of the tragedy facing the United States. Paula, back to you.
Kelly, I wanted to go back to a point you made much earlier on, and you were talking about the efforts underway at the White House and the kinds of phone calls are being made to establish even greater support for the United States. I think Colin Powell made it very clear to me in an interview yesterday that in order to fight this kind of terrorism, the United States is going to have to build even stronger bridges that is, with friendly nations. I don't know whether you got to hear Christiane Amanpour's interview with Jacques Chirac, but she asked him a pointed question about France not necessarily always being in 100% agreement with some United States policies, and asked him the extent to which France would continue to be involved with fighting terrorism. And he basically said that they're going to have to see how this thing proceeds, but obviously offered the backing of the French government. Can you give us any analysis of the level of support the president expects from Western European nations?
Well, I think Ari Fleischer was sort of asked that. I did not hear Christiane Amanpour's interview, but we were sort of asking Ari Fleischer exactly why is sort of the U.S. trying to build this international consensus? Does it feel it needs that before it takes any military action if it decides to take such action? And Fleischer said that looking at the UN Security Council, that it passing a resolution condemning this, saying that the attacks against the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, really were attacks against the security of the United States, and that affects the entire world. So the situation, the magnitude of the situation, you get the sense from White House officials because of the number of victims, because of the World Trade Center, the Pentagon being attacked, that this administration is reaching out and that getting more support than maybe it has in previous cases because of the magnitude of the situation. And you're also getting the sense here, Paula, that again, it's not clear what the U.S. is asking for, if it's asking for additional military support, if it's asking for countries like France to join together and slam sanctions against a country if a country is deemed responsible to support any terrorism. Not clear what the U.S. is asking for, but it's clear that the administration is trying to, A, determine who is responsible, but it is also sort of looking at this opportunity to take a stronger, maybe more of a long-term battle against terrorism and trying to sort of build that international coalition to make sure that those responsible are taken out, if you will, but also to make sure that something like this never happens again. So the gravity of the situation seems to be why the U.S. is expecting and counting on the support of really the entire world. Paula?
Kelly, any reaction there to the news conference some Pakistani officials held earlier today? Pakistanis, or at least the officials at least, showing great regret about what happened in this attack, saying they clearly, in their words, are against terrorism. And yet, no one should forget that Pakistan is one of 3 governments that actually recognizes the Taliban government, the religious group now in charge of Afghanistan. Any reaction to that at all?
Well, that is exactly why it is significant. We don't really have any new reaction to that latest briefing. We do know that the U.S. ambassador to Pakistan met with General Musharraf, the military leader of Pakistan, today, coming out of that meeting, saying that the general sort of gave a very positive statement, a strong statement, that Pakistan stands with the United States. That is significant for just the reasons you mentioned, that Pakistan, and I believe it's the United Arab Emirates and one other country, only 3 that recognize the Taliban as sort of the ruling government of Afghanistan. So it's very significant because if Pakistan is sort of stepping back, it means that Afghanistan could be further isolated. And obviously, if the U.S. government determines that A, Osama bin Laden or his network were involved in this, and that the Taliban might be providing safe haven for Osama bin Laden, well then Afghanistan losing the support of the Pakistanis there. Paula, back to you.
All right, Kelly, I'm just going to quickly fill in some time here before this conference call gets underway between the governor of New York and the mayor of New York City with the president. We have just gotten information that LaGuardia Airport, which is one of the 3 area airports that has just opened, is now being evacuated. We have no idea what that means, and as soon as we get more information on that, we'll bring it to you. Of course, you heard Transportation Secretary Mineta talking about the new security guidelines that will be in place in airports across the nation. Here's the president picking up the phone, talking to New York's top leaders.
Yeah, thank you all very much for taking my phone call. First of all, I can't tell you how sad I am and America is for the people of New York City and the tri-state area. I want to let you know there's a quiet anger in America that really is real. And also, though, I can't tell you how proud I am of the good citizens of your part of the world